Welcome to what we now want to begin as a CIA adventure, really, every 9.5 months as we celebrate or put together more information about every star point. So this time with the Aries point being made, it's really quite significant to start this off. I talked about it with Arielle back in at ISAR last year in October, and I said, let's start a Venus mission somehow. And then as the star points happen, the next one being next January, we'll do another one, probably much more with a mundane focus. Then we've got an idea for the Scorpio point, which would be relationship astrology and maybe the phases of Venus. So there's a lot that can be done with Venus, and no longer is Venus, what do you call it? Venus it's not enough to know just Venus by her aspects, by her sign and by her house. And you'll see today how much, how significant that is for most of us working with the Venus star. So I call this sort of section that I do, I suppose it's a bit of an opening to the Venus star. The other two agents are going to get more specific about Arielle with the Aries point being made, coming up this March, and Gemini Brett is going to focus on one whole cycle mostly, although we'll have to try and contain him. No, I'm just kidding. Again, so much information, we can't put it all in at this time. So yeah, I call looking at the Venus star getting in touch with the rhythm divine, because as we'll see, it's completely an amazing and beautiful cycle. So I've got for today in Melbourne here the rising of when we started here today at 10 a.m. or starting right now, and Venus is at 13 degrees of Aries and she's rising. So how perfect is that? As Arielle was saying, yes, Neptune-Sun conjunction. The interesting thing about Venus, she's stationing to go retrograde here, is that the CIA has Venus at 8 degrees of Libra, so it's opposite our CIA Venus. But not only that, it's actually our CIA's Venus star point, the point that Arielle writes a lot about, the special point, as we all have 5 points in the star that move all together. There's one point that happens before your birth that Arielle says is the most important. It's like the special gift point, and ours is at 11 Aries. So here we go. It's perfect for today. And there's a bit of commotion, so we hope everything will go smoothly. You never know with technology. Just to say, if anything breaks down, just come back to the same link for whatever reason we're disconnected, because Uranus, Mars, and the Moon are all together, and you can never be too sure. So to introduce the star and how I use it, and in the end how I use a lot of the astrology that I do, since becoming a bit fractal kind of mad in my head, fractals being so beautiful, they also help me by understanding the nature of fractals. They really help me understand astrology as well, in the sense that I see the nature of astrology as being very fractal-like. And the Venus star in particular really picks up a divine sort of rhythm and patterning the more you look at it. So like our own, say, signature, we're born with a particular Venus star in a particular sort of place and houses connected to planets in our chart. And through our lifetime, it moves. It continues moving. It's never stopping. Like anything in our astrology, we start with a natal chart, and we can call that the initial conditions of our pattern. And then the pattern is ever evolving like a fractal. So I actually look at, we can do that with Mercury, we can do that with Mars, we can do that with any planet, but Venus just personifies how let's say beautifully it works. So when we look at what a fractal is, we know it's a never-ending pattern, and like I said, our initial conditions we could look at as being our astrology chart. They're completely complex, they're different to everyone, and the conditions change depending on what goes back in the feedback loop. And the feedback loop is all about what our consciousness is, about how we understand one particular pattern in our chart. So let's say the Aries point in our chart that we're going to talk about today, how that continues to be a pattern, a good one, a negative one, a way to connect to whatever's happening in the Aries department or the Aries part of our chart at the moment. So, and fractals are very much part of nature. We see them in flowers, we see them in vegetables, we see them in river systems, in so many places that it's just organic. It makes you feel as though astrology is much more alive. It's much more organic. It's all part of our, opening, our flowering, our evolving. And of course, I do think, because it is a pattern and we're talking about cycles in astrology, it very much suits that fractal nature. And there's, so at the bottom there, we can see that there's different, depending on what formulas are set, that's what kind of fractal is going to begin the process, okay? So, we could say there's a Gemini Brett set, there's an Arielle set, there is actually a Julija set, which I really like too. So that is your own particular fractal pattern that will be coming up. So as we look at the beautiful flower that is made, the geometry of the Venus star and the flowering, it's best to look at it as a flowering in our chart as well. And we'll see examples as we go. And the 5 points, there's 5 points that happen in your chart and move slowly backwards about 2 degrees every 8 years, or every cycle, or every time it comes back, it's kind of oscillating in the same point and then moves on backwards in your chart. So you have what we call the Venus star that you were born with, and then you put together the Venus star that's happening now, and you have a zone in your astrology chart that really highlights particular houses, particular planets, and we're going to look at particular examples of that as we go. So yes, this amazing pentacle that's drawn as the flower actually unfolds is another big part of the cycle as well, of course. And the main part about using the Venus star for me is that we don't isolate just one point, or let's say the Aries retrograde that's coming up this weekend, as an isolated point in our astrology. It's something that's connected to the past, very much so, again, like a lot of astrology and cycles are, depending how quick they are, and into the future as well. And there's something, the more I've kind of looked at the star and how it kind of is reflected in people and their lives, is it's almost like a patterning that has been set way before time, and we kind of jump into it like this is our rhythm already. This is how we're proceeding in this lifetime, and this is how we go out. So it's really, really interesting to do with life and death. The Venus star is not, as not everything in life is so beautiful, let's say, coping with people leaving us and that type of thing, but it does significantly show up with using the Venus star. Now, as I was saying in the introduction, having met Arielle at the Venus transit in 2012, I really do see that the Venus star has become something quite significant, not just to astrologers, but to the people associated with astronomy, and just what do you call it? Not scientifically, but open-minded people going, wow, look, this is what happens in the cosmos. And it has really introduced a lot more people to understanding that there's something out there. So the Venus star we can be grateful for, and the Venus transits for alerting us in this day and age to what is happening out there in the cosmos. Like eclipses, of course, they happen every 2 years, but this is a tiny sort of eclipse with the Venus beauty spot going in front of the sun, of course. So the little bit of research that I did about that years ago, back for 2012, was that we're currently in the age of what we call the Gemini Venus transits, or they've been now. And they will be sort of activated until the next transits that happen in Sagittarius in 120 years' time or so. And if we look back at the times that the Venus transits happened in Gemini, then 120 or so years later, they happen in Sagittarius in the opposite node, and then happen back in Gemini, and so on. So they're only happening in Gemini and Sagittarius. I think it's for about 2,000 years, so it's a long period of time. But the little significant ages of about 120 years is what we're living in now. And I've called it, the age of awareness. There's many sort of other factors towards that. The Gemini, the Pluto-Neptune conjunction in the late 1900s was in Gemini, a few other things, of course, as well. But what's interesting is what the era that we're living through now, we can liken it to the time of the Renaissance, because that's when the transits happened in Gemini as well, and also the Age of Enlightenment. And the way that I put the Gemini sort of factor together is this is where we open up to new information. It's like we've had a reboot to the system to say, hang on, you guys have forgotten all of this, because in the Sagittarian times, we've got the Age of Reason and the Age of Imperialism. So it's very Sagittarius, gung-ho, this is the truth, this is what we're following, and this is what we're going to do. So it's much more, it's such a different dynamic, and it really, really suits what's going on. So it's a fascinating cycle all around. The transits are quite different, but and a bigger cycle, of course. So let's concentrate on more the star that's happening now. So if we get back to, the beauty of Venus, or just the purity of her symbol, we know that the Venus symbol is made up of the circle of spirit and the cross of matter, on top of each other. And, together there's a, more esoteric meaning to this symbol of being, spirit rising up from matter, so that, to live a full life of, it's not all about material gain and everything that happens down here. It's all about the combination of rising and connecting more to the divine source as well. So Venus has always, in a sense, been attributed with that as well. As we know, Venus represents very much the mirror that is reflecting back to us what our life brings. So the agent of attraction, I often call her. So in relationship, in the likes that we have, in the dislikes that we have, and in how we like ourselves, like by holding a mirror up and, and what, not just by looks, of course, and more what's internally significant. Of course, I think, I'm not sure when I first put this together, but I think it was maybe with you, Arielle, and perhaps this is not the right rosary bead. Actually, I've put the wrong rosary beads in here. But that's funny. That shows how not religious I am. But rosary beads, usually the Catholic rosary beads, have five strands or stations, 5 sections. And sorry, this one only shows 4. It's supposed to have 5, and then they've got 5 beads down the bottom where that cross is. So very much related to a passion and a devotion, as a nun would be devoted to God. Okay, so again, sorry for the for the picture. You've got it there, Arielle. It's on there, is it? Yes. Okay. And then, of course, the beautiful rose, the rose that is that opens, I'd like to say, as the flower. The more, the older we are, the better we get at actually being ourselves, so liking ourselves, not caring so much what others think. And this is the development of the flower around our charts. Every 8 years it completes the cycle, and then what do you call it? And opens up, evolves. We're much more mature at the age of 40 than we were at 20, and know so much more about what we like in life as well. So that's quite symbolic. The star, of course, most of us can probably remember drawing the five-pointed star. I remember the first time, in school doodling, as a young girl and going, oh, this is magic, isn't it? The way it all connects. And I know you can do that with other points. It doesn't have to be five-pointed star, but, it's usually the five-pointed star. So the way that it's all connected is just simple, in a sense, geometry that makes it eternal and cyclical and a pattern. A gold star or a star has always represented, and usually a five-pointed one, some kind of, achievement. Admirals wear them. Che Guevara wore it on his head. What's my specialness? What's my special gift? And we can look at the Venus points like that as well. And of course, the pentacle that is associated with the five-pointed star, is probably one of the most powerful symbols in the world, and often, can be looked at as, much more negative because people don't understand that what it is. And that really brings in the magical quality of working, I think, with astrology in general, but particularly the Venus points and the star, because there's no other planet that really does such a beautiful, amazing sort of picture around for us. Some of you may know or may not know, but the cycle of Venus, as we call it, like one whole cycle around the sun, and her connections with the Earth and the sun and Venus all lining up. And the way that she moves in one cycle, what we call on the left there, the maximum elongation east and west of the star, makes like a peace symbol as well in the circle. And Deb Holding, I remember she wrote about this in a TMA, the Mountain Astrologer, years ago, which was the first time, having looked at the synodic cycle, and we see that graph a lot. It's like, yeah, there's the peace symbol, but she actually talked about it being, I think I've got some information on that in a minute, but there's the peace symbol as well. So Venus representing balance, beauty, a peaceful, balanced life as well. I mean, really in the end, that's all we want to dream of as well. And then of course we add the rose. So we've got like these incredible, really rich symbols that, to understand Venus is to get all of this happening in our lives as well. And again, I'd like to just sort of say that she's not just all about relationships. Often in astrology, we hear that Venus is all about our relationships. Well, first of all, it's a relationship to ourselves that we have to have, and the blossoming of relationships comes after that. Or with that, or what have you. So different for everybody. So this is the current Venus star. It repeats as we had the last point before this one coming up in Aries was in Gemini as what we call the exterior conjunction. So it was when Venus was moving very fast. Now she comes back down to Earth, so to speak, 9.5 months later to make her Aries retrograde point. So from the Gemini point, she continues all the way around the chart, and to end up 72 degrees backward from where she was at the Gemini point. So that's was at 288 degrees onward, she makes her next point. So is it 288 degrees? Yes. And that's the way, the star point continues. So every time she comes back to one area of the chart, it will be 4 years later, and they will alternate from being retrograde points to direct points. Okay, so just something to keep in mind, and also a reminder that the Venus points are not just isolated one-time events in your life as well. Another big thing to know about the Venus star points, of course, is that it's the coming together of Venus and the Sun. And the Venus and the Sun, combination is very much about the spirit and the matter in a way coming together. So working with the Venus star, it's like, where do I put that together in my life? So, you know, as much as I can, let's say. I know there's a lot more work done on the heliacal rising of Venus, meaning when Venus, after the star point's made as a retrograde, and then she rises as the morning star, as being as significant as the Venus star. So Gemini Brett will talk about that a bit more, you know, in the last section. But for now, we're going to concentrate on when the star points are made with the Venus-Sun conjunction, okay? So one whole cycle, I'm not going to get into this much either, because Agent 1123 will extrapolate on this, but one whole cycle, so one turn of Venus around the Sun, let's say, in her connection to Earth, is 584 days, and it's called the synodic cycle, okay? And half of that cycle is 288 days, and it's a 9.5 month cycle, okay? So the difference being that she has a morning star 9.5 month cycle and an evening star morning part of her cycle as well. And this is how astronomers see her cycle, that she's new when she's closest to the Earth, okay? And she moves to become a morning star and is a very shiny, bright crescent. That's when she's at her brightest or close to it. She moves to half, what do we call, you know, like a half phase. So Venus has phases like the moon. She moves towards gibbous as she's moving away from us, getting, you know, dimmer in the sky, but she's actually growing in fullness. And then full when we can't see her. There's a big period of time, about 60 days, when she's traveling with the Sun, behind the Sun, that we don't see her, often attributed to her time in the underworld. And again, we'll have more of that later. She comes out as the evening star, as a waning gibbous, becomes half again, and there's the crescent, which we've just seen now in our evening skies. You know, the crescent, she's been really bright and she's about to sort of sink back down into the Earth for another, you know, the 40 days and 40 nights of retrograde, which is also often attributed to the underworld experience. So they're known, these two star points, as interior conjunctions and exterior. So at the moment, we're going to have the interior conjunction, sometimes called the inferior, but I remember, I think it was Melanie Reinhardt said, let's not call it inferior. Let's call it, let's call it interior. And I agree, because, you know, let's say both of these conjunctions are equal, and then the exterior conjunction with the Sun when she's on the other side. Now, there's a bit of debate between traditionalist astrologers as to which part of the cycle's new. As I said, this is I really see the newness of her is when she rises as a morning star, much more attributed to an Aries kind of point in a cycle. Like, we know that astrology can be adapted to any cycle. Okay, and so I see the morning star as being very Aryan, and I see the evening star, and as she comes down to sink back down into Earth, as the Pisces time, the letting go, the releasing, it's very balsamic, whereas the morning star is very, very new. So, you know, looking at it in that sort of sense, as we look at a full cycle of the moon. And there's much more connections to Venus and the way that she moves like the moon, which I'll get to in a minute as well. And that is that traditional astrology would say that the evening star coming out, let's say, is the beginning of her cycle, because that's when she's the dimmest and when she's the lower, like she's far away and we can't see her. And she comes up in the evening sky. Okay, fair enough. But in this phase, she's actually full. She's waxing full. She's moving very, very fast still. She is in the evening sky, but what we got to remember is that she doesn't go around the Earth. She actually travels around the Sun. The moon travels around the Earth, and yes, we see them both in the evening sky, but I don't agree with that. I just don't agree with that. I'm not sure what others sort of think about that, but I very much see the retrograde coming out as the morning star, as the beginning of Venus' cycle. So now let's have a look at the combinations of the cycle and where we get to with the amazing number 1.6. So one Venus cycle is actually 19 months, so 1.6 years, the equivalent of 584 days. Okay, so one loop around the sun. And of course, our earthly loop is 365 days. And when we divide those together, we get 1.6 as well. Now, we have five cycles of 5 of these cycles, so 5 loops that happen in 8 years that create the star, of course, and 5 and 8 divided is also 1.6. The other thing that Venus does is that she only revolves in, like our Earth revolves every day, you know, it's spinning around once a day, 365 revolutions in a year. But Venus actually only spins 1.5 times in every 584 day cycle. In 8 years, she does only 13 revolutions, and 13 and 8 is also 1.6. And there's actually more to this. I remember doing much more work on this, and there's much more that relates to this 1.6 ratio. And of course, many of us know that this ratio is one of the most sacred sort of ratios that is related to the sacred geometry that is in the system, is organically everywhere, and also has been very much picked up as the divine proportion of where, things of beauty and grace develop and grow and present themselves everywhere on the planet, from the shape of of a galaxy to beautiful, Leonardo paintings and so on, the Vitruvian Man, the shape of the body, from the five senses, 5 fingers, the fingers to the hands to the ratio in the body, and we can look at that in so many ways. So Venus's attributes of beauty and grace and divine proportions, we can relate that to the Venus star, as we've seen all these numbers, 5, 8 and 13 significantly. Also, when we put them together, they are part of what we call a sequence called the Fibonacci sequence. And the Fibonacci sequence is related to the beautiful spiral that opens up, that the smaller part is to the larger part, what the larger part is to the whole. And so we can see that the numbers, and this is also Gemini Brett's number 1123, is that we start, every part of the cycle grows by the same ratio of 1.6. So if we divide all these numbers, onto each other, we get the ratio of 1.6. It's actually 1.618, but that's very, very close enough. So keeping in mind that this is very, very much a part of a natural kind of evolution and grace to our own opening, and also a very nice way to look at that as well. This is, what I was talking about just before with the peace symbol, just reflected in the Venus's synodic main points, the exterior, interior conjunction and the elongation points. And it was the peace symbol that was, it became the peace symbol, but it was first made for a symbol for nuclear disarmament back in 1958, and then became this peace symbol. And it was the semaphore for no ND, meaning nuclear disarmament. Yes, so the N and the D is how you'd write it. So this is also part of, why it's good to, let's say, start this Venus mission. We perhaps want to include some kind of art and the making of flowers and artwork and whatever as we grow with igniting the world with the Venus star. So as you can see, the fractal like pattern and star of the flower is forever unfolding, like a Fibonacci sequence, or like the divine proportions of our own astrology chart. So full of the Venusian principles and a reflection to ourselves of how we embrace beauty, love, a peaceful life, a harmonious life, and what we do about it, or how passionate we are. So these are all reminder times, when we look at the Venus star in our charts, and what she's doing. And maybe sometimes there's times when she doesn't seem to be doing so much, but it's such a great thing to connect to for yourself and for own self-development, because I think most of us as astrologers are using astrology as a guide, as a co-creative, participatory, combination, as opposed to a very predictive one. Although the more I've done work with the Venus star, the more I've added her to, predictions, or, people asking, when's my love coming? And when you put all the things together and you ask a few more questions and say, well, it's most likely at this time, because I see a Venus point also being activated somehow. So again, it feels as though I'm only just at the beginning of exploring this Venus star, although I've been doing it for years, but the more and more I do, the more and more that comes up. So now I'm just going to sort of take you through a way of adapting it to your own chart for now. So this is the next Venus. This is the current Venus star, okay? So the red star shows where our next retrograde star point will be made, at 4 degrees 57. And the others are occurring. The next one will happen in January 2018. And of course, there's a list of all of these that is in the PDF as well. Will happen at 21 Capricorn. Another one will be the next retrograde next November 2018, at 2 Scorpio. Another one occurs at around 22, 21 Leo, which will be a direct point, because the last one was a retrograde Leo, if you remember, 2015. And then we're going to have the next retrograde. Anyway, then we have another point at Gemini, which is where the transits happen. Now, when we have a retrograde star point made, we have Venus and the Sun, together only very quickly. Okay, so Venus, it's because Venus is moving very slow, and she pops in and out. She pops out. She's only actually gone into the underworld for about, I don't know, is it 10 to 15 days, or maybe 20 days? Maybe it's about 20 days. Although the retrograde's 40 days, so because the Sun moves past and she's slow. But at the peak times, as I call it, when Venus is in her superior conjunction, Venus and the Sun travel together for a very long time. So as opposed to, like, the retrograde points are perhaps more, quick shift type of experiences, although 40 days, 40 nights is not such a quick time. But when we consider the outer points, it's almost like there's an overwhelming sort of buzz at the time, and you might notice it. And the more you're going to be into this, the more you're going to notice this now. It's as though, you're sort of propelled on a mission somehow. I call it Venus on a mission. And I also see that part of her journey as much more, not all of us don't go to the underworld at this time, okay? We have our own experience. I see it as a very confrontational experience to do with relationships or somehow kind of career highlights. And also, again, for all of us, it can be so different. But just to regard the superior conjunction times as really quite significant as well. And often that's not looked at in astrology enough. I don't think so. And actually, just getting back to that, if I was to actually, let's say use a bit of wider orbs to do with the Sun-Venus conjunction. I think I've used about 8-10 degrees in this graph here. If I was to use, say, 15-degree orbs, which is the natural kind of way the ancients looked at, Venus being, or any planet being joined to the Sun, it would take up the whole chart. Okay, so if I made that red zone bigger and made the blue zone bigger, it's actually Venus Sun conjunctions happen all around our chart over 8 years, which is really quite interesting. So therefore that Venus and the Sun are the most quick, together planets in our charts as well, or in our transiting charts. Okay, so here's the graph of the star again. When we look at the Aries point coming up, what we want to remember is that the point also happened, it's going to happen in 4 years' time as the direct point, okay? And it happened 4 years ago as the direct point as well. It also was retrograde there 8 years ago in 2009 and was the direct point 4 years ago, before that again in 2005. So pretty much we go back every 4 years and sort of this is what you do if, for those of you who want to do a much more serious study of your own astrology chart, this is what you do. Okay, and you kind of remember significant years in your life and so on, and you'll be surprised what comes up. So knowing that at every star point we want to actually look at the 4 year cycle, not just the not just the Venus return, as often we have been, let's say, taught in astrology. Now there's, we need to look at the halfway point or the midpoint of that cycle as well. Now, interestingly, some of you may know this already, but the moon does a similar thing. The moon has a cycle where every 4 years it will repeat in its opposite place, as in there's a new moon coming up at 7 degrees of Aries in March, 28th of March, just after the Venus-Sun conjunction, which seems quite significant. And in 4 years' time, there's going to be a full moon there. It's within, 1 or 2 degrees as well. So that this very much reiterates the point of how important the Venus full, new moon Venus and, new Venus and full Venus, and the significance of, because of the repetition of the cycle. And then we again have this, this one was going back 4 years, and now I'm going ahead 4 years from the one that I talked about in 2017. And there it is again. So it oscillates from being the same place as a new moon and then opposite with the full moon. So really, really interesting, as though, to keep that in mind when we're looking at the Venus star and cycle. And again, Venus having two sides, she's new or full. What symbology sort of comes up with that as well. The Greeks, the ancient Greeks, always had two different personalities of Aphrodite. One was Aphrodite Pandemos and one was Aphrodite Urania. So very much the earthy goddess and the heavenly goddess. I very much see the retrograde Venus, or the Venus coming down to earth, as much more earthy. So Pandemos is much more sort of lusty. What can I get out of this? Very Taurian-like, okay? And the Aphrodite Urania is the heavenly goddess with stars all around her. So, they, perhaps as the Babylonians saw her in the outer conjunction very much more as going into the underworld as an Ana, there was a thing that, Venus is gone off to the heavens, and I prefer to see her like that actually. But I know, and in the experience, some of the Venus star points are underworld experiences and some are upper world. So again, depending on what's happening in your chart. Now, with Venus as well, we either have her moving fast or slow. She's either bright in the sky or you can hardly see her. She's visible, invisible. She's waxing, she's waning. She's morning, she's evening. She's new, she's full. She's related, more to Libra or Taurus, or retrograde and direct. Now, all of those combinations, or say either of those, like crisscross patterns, will give you your own Venus phase as well. We'll do another sort of section on that, and I know there's a few astrologers that work with that, colleagues like Michelle Finey and Adam Gainsbourg. You probably know a few more as well. both of you, but so that defines your type of Venus. So again, it's not enough to know Venus by her sign and by her house and the aspects she makes, because you put all of this into the picture and you've got a pretty significant, Venus, or, individualized. Okay, so again, here's those 3 5-star points. Okay, I'm nearly finished. God, time goes fast when you do this stuff. So as an example, this is what I want you to do. You've all got the Venus ephemeris that was sent to you, and if you haven't, it's going to be on the page that I set up with the link for this recording, and where you can download it and all that sort of thing. But Justin Trudeau, as Arielle would point out, was born with his Venus star point, like the special point before his birth, was at 3 degrees of Virgo. Okay, it's right on his ascendant. And he's also got another star point at 3 degrees of Aquarius, which is right on his Venus. Like, don't we all want him as the president of the world? Or, I know there's some people that don't like him, but what a great example of someone that's really, really liked in the world to start with. So these are the points that he was born with, and this is what you do to create. Find the points that you were born with. So go to the year of your birth in the PDF that you have been given. Look up the star point before your birth, okay, and then plot the next five points, so that he was, August the 27th, 1971 was his pre-star point, 3 degrees Virgo, and then the next 5 down. Plot them around your chart, okay? Then you put in the star that's happening now. So go to, 2000 and where are we, 17, and put the 5 points around your chart. And again, then you're left with a zone of Venus star zone, as I'd call it, and see what's in there. Do the tracking and see where it's been every year, over your lifetime, and you will be amazed significantly what you will find there. Haven't got enough time to go into too many more charts here, but I will do as we move on with these sessions. So, where are they happening for Justin? Of course, their 5th house, 3rd house, moved into the 12th house, which is interesting. So from his ascendant into his 12th house, the Venus star that's happening in his 12th house is trining his Jupiter. It's actually something that's happening to Donald Trump as well. The Leo point is actually trining, I think it's his Jupiter, or his sun, or his moon actually. And I remember looking at that last year and considering Hillary was having a star point, her Leo star point, conjuncting Saturn, whereas Trump was having his trining his moon. And it's like, oh, are we in trouble here? So, again, significant to actually follow the star points and add them to the system of, the astrology that you do, of course. Just a quick synopsis of Justin's points as I looked through, and I was actually doing David Bowie last night because I saw the documentary, The Last 5 Years of His Life. And, again, a lot of things sort of coming up about the star points, highlighting, him finding out, or the Aries star point, I think it's also where his Chiron was. Chiron in Scorpio, highlighting when he found out he was going to die and stuff in the 10th house, and letting people know and that type of thing. Anyway, so just a few experiences that Justin's had. He was born with 1 star point at 19 degrees of Aries in his 8th house. His parents separated when he was quite young, and the star point was happening in the 8th house, okay? The parents eventually divorced and made it more public, or it was, the recognition of that quite a few years later when a star point was happening in his 10th house. 10th house will very much relate to, times of announcements as well, out there in the world. A star point happened in Scorpio in his third house in 98 when his younger brother died in an avalanche as well. Interestingly, his wife was very good friends with his brother. They went to school together and they reconnected over that time, and then married in remet and then married or got engaged in 2004, an announcement being made in the year, again 10th house, and married at the star point in 2005 when the star point was in the 8th house, so again house of commitment. Then, I mean, some things are much more significant than others, but again, you know, you're going to see what comes up. And the last star point at 22 degrees Leo, which happened as a retrograde in his 12th house, was trining Jupiter, and that was a few months later that he became, of course, the Canadian Prime Minister. So really interesting things to look at. First of all, do your own and then really adapt it to other things. So now the ephemeris that Arielle has kindly given us all for the PDF is the way that we can look into the future as well to know where the star points are going to, let's say, shift signs because they go backwards in the zodiac. So sometime in your life, some of those points, the Aquarius point, and which other one is it? Let me see, the Aquarius point. Now I can't remember. Another one have shifted signs in our lifetime. And the next one to shift signs will be the Scorpio point because they go backwards, will be shifting into Libra. Okay? And Arielle might be talking about that a bit more. So just generally, you know, as we know the Venus star or get to know her, first of all, work out your star zone, as I said, using the ephemeris. What 5 houses have been touched by the Venus star as she moves on average 2 degrees backward every year? What planets are they in these areas? What have been touched by that? And if they've been touched, they're going to be sort of touched for, you know, again 8 years later, and again even 6, you know, another 8 years later. So they're kind of oscillating and active for a while. Okay, so again, it sort of tells you about a sort of era of time or when you can expect things to really sort of fruition in that area. What angles will be transited by a star point? Again, very significant. When I was looking at David Bowie's, when he started, you know, in the early 70s, when his fame was really sort of riding high and he became the Thin White Duke, and on a big high, the Venus star point was 3 Aquarius and moving over his ascendant. What happened when the star point happened there? Yeah, again, not just 8 years ago, but 4 years ago, 12, 16, and so on. And see the difference in the retrogrades and the direct star points and see which ones are most significant. And you might be quite surprised because of the kind of overwhelmingness of the star point, the superior star point that I've found. I've also very much started using the star points for electional astrology. So, you know, if you're doing an election to pick the right time, and let's say something's rising in Leo, instead of making it a star point that's been like 28 Leo, maybe you'd want to make it, you know, 19 or 18 Leo, where the star point is heading, right? That type of thing. The CIA has a star point at 20 to 23 Capricorn, which is one of the star points moving slowly backwards in our 12th house because it's our ascendant. And the last time the star point was made there as a retrograde was when our Facebook page started getting 35,000 people a week. This is when we were just like, what is going on? We had so, you know, like it was just going up. It was just screaming along, and it's really settled down after that. But for all this time, it's like people said, Julia, how did you get so many people to like the page? And I said, I didn't. It just went viral. And that was, so, you know, I mean, again, watching all of that is really significant, and using it for electional astrology. Consider the star point and where it will be made in your solar return as well. Like again, Venus will make a star point once a year. She'll do the retrograde only 1.6 years, but there will be something significant. So look for that as we would for an eclipse or whatever in a solar return. Of course, using it in relationship astrology, one of the reasons I really got excited about using this Venus star and wanted to know more was that I had a star point transiting my descendant, or coming closer towards that, when I met my husband. I met him when I was 8 years old. It was through a community thing. We kissed 8 years later when the star point was there when I was 16 and he was 24. So the 8 years thing was in his system as well. And then we got married before the last star point, before I was 24. And when the star point was, oh, now I can't remember. It must have been the 10th house or something like that. Anyway, but you know, quite significant. But I have to say that I've also seen people's star points being activated, let's say because they've got Pluto on the descendant and a friend dies. So it depends what's going on there. Mine was Gemini, so meeting the soulmate, meeting the twin, whatever. And I've got no significant planets there, or Pluto. So again, there's a lot of different things that will come into the picture depending on what your chart is made of. And so, yeah, adding it to predictions as well. I've got written here solar cars, maybe as well. Solar charts and progression, solar arcs, that's what it is. And progressions will also show up many things where the star points are heading. Yeah, and as I was saying, it's not always a bunch of roses with Venus. There are, yeah, you know, we live life, we lose people, partners, all that type of thing, and I've seen that. And even your own death, you know, people leaving the planet with you know, Venus heading to the heavenly plane you know, I've seen that a lot as well. So life, you know, it very much highlights life highlights and missions, you know, particular personal missions, but also very much ignites the mission within one as well, you know, by doing more work with that. So, you know, blessings, children coming into your life, promotions, rewards, career highlights, all that type of thing. But again, do your research to know what kind of things you're there, you know, happening for you. And of course, in relationships, now just, you know, I'll finish up in a sec, but soulmates meet. I've seen soulmates meeting with the Venus star happening in the 12th house, okay, or the 7th, but very, very common. Then declarations of marriage and love happen in the 10th, okay. It's not surprising. Commitments, you know, romance and stuff, of course, and children, 5th house type of things, or the romance might develop, or that's when you kind of spy someone. You know, you might spy someone at the, you know, edge of a room, maybe nothing, you know, it depends. Again, very interesting. And of course, children very much connected to the 5th house. So as we look at Venus, we know that the retrograde cycle is about some kind of readjustment time, and the direct, I very much see her as a, you know, on a mission. So we need to look at, like we do with a full and a new moon, we need to look at Venus like that. So from more of an inner perspective to more outer one. Okay, so new and full, and that the star points, you know, kind of oscillate in an area of our charts and our lives, you know, for quite a few years, not just 8 years, but more into this sort of 16-year zone, and maybe even more, because I think the Gemini point actually is the most oscillating one. I'm not sure if that's because it's on its own node there, that Venus is on her own south node there. So that's it. So, you know, consider one whole cycle, which you're going to, you know, learn more and more about. So one whole cycle, one petal of the flower that makes up the whole, you know, the whole beautiful rose that is the Venus star, Venus flower that happens in our charts. And very much, you know, this is our creation story, you know, so getting into and connecting to it a lot more is very much about our own personal growth, you know, conscious evolution. Careful what you put into the feedback loop. Very much, very, very important for astrology, and very much about a natural and divine rhythm that we can connect to. So that's it for me.